Hey, you gonna just sit there all day? Mrs. Thompson's voice cut through the silence like a knife. I was in my makeshift office, a small table in the corner of the bedroom, trying to focus on my web design project. I looked up, meeting her stern gaze. Just working, Mrs. Thompson, I replied, trying to keep my voice even. She snorted, clearly unimpressed. Working? Looks like you're just playing on that computer. When I was your age, I had real chores. I sighed inwardly. This was a daily ritual. Ever since I moved into the Thompson house, after marrying Mark, her son, I'd felt like an outsider. Mark, a kind-hearted man with a constant travel schedule for work, was my rock. But with him away, the house felt cold, uninviting. Anna, Mark's sister, walked in, her 2 kids trailing behind her. "Mom, have you seen my phone charger?" she asked, ignoring me completely. "Try the living room," Mrs. Thompson suggested, still eyeing me suspiciously. I returned to my screen, trying to block out their conversation. Anna's kids, Lily and Max, ran around, their shrieks piercing the air. I loved kids, but these 2 were wild, unchecked. "Rose, can you watch the kids? I need to run an errand," Anna said, assuming more than asking. "I really need to finish this project, Anna," I replied, feeling the pressure. "It's not like you're doing anything important," she retorted, her voice tinged with condescension. I bit back a sharper retort. Mark always said to keep the peace. But it was hard, especially with Anna treating me like a free babysitter and her mother questioning my every move. The door opened, and Mark stepped in, a brief respite in my day. "Hey, love," he greeted, wrapping his arms around me. "Hey," I smiled, feeling a momentary relief. "How's everyone?" he asked, looking around. "Just the usual," I replied, glancing at his mother and sister. Mrs. Thompson interjected, "Mark, tell your wife to help more around here. She's always on that computer." Mark looked at me, then back at his mother. "Mom, Rose works hard. Her job is just as valid as any other." Anna rolled her eyes. "Sure, if you call sitting all day work. Mark sighed. "Anna, let's not start this again." I appreciated Mark's support, but I could tell he was tired of playing mediator. As he left to unpack, Mrs. Thompson gave me a look that could curdle milk. "Remember, Rose, this is my house. You follow my rules," she said sharply. I nodded, feeling the familiar knot of frustration in my stomach. I was an orphan, with no family to turn to. This was my home now, but it didn't feel like it. As I turned back to my computer, I promised myself that things would change. Mark and I were saving for our own place. A home where respect and kindness weren't foreign concepts. A place where I could work in peace, love openly, and be myself. The house was buzzing with noise, but I felt more alone than ever. Mark had just left for another one of his work trips, and the emptiness he left behind was tangible. I was in the kitchen, trying to fix myself some toast, when Mrs. Thompson barged in. "Can't you make something more useful? You're always eating bread. No wonder you're so skinny," she remarked, her tone dripping with disdain. "Just not very hungry, Mrs. Thompson," I replied, keeping my voice calm. "You'd be hungry if you did some real work around here," she shot back, rummaging through the fridge. I sighed and left the kitchen with my toast. Eating in my room seemed like a better option than enduring another round of criticism. Later, as I tried to concentrate on my work, Anna's voice echoed from the hallway. "Rose, can you watch the kids again? I've got to run out." "Anna, I really need to get this work done. It's important," I responded, feeling the frustration build up. "Oh, come on, it's just clicking around on a computer. How hard can it be?" Anna retorted, her voice laced with sarcasm. I bit my tongue, resisting the urge to argue. It was easier to agree than to start another fight. "Fine, I'll watch them," I conceded. As I tried to manage Lily and Max, who were more interested in playing tag around my workspace, I realized how isolated I felt in this house. Surrounded by people, yet so alone. That night, I heard Anna and Mrs. Thompson talking in the living room. "She's not right for Mark. Just sits in her room all day, doing God knows what on that computer." Mrs. Thompson's voice was sharp and clear. "Yeah, and have you noticed how she never joins us for meals anymore? As if she's too good for us," Anna added, her words like daggers. I lay in bed, their words stinging. I missed Mark's presence, his understanding. He was the buffer between me and their constant judgment. Without him, it felt like I was an easy target. The next day, as I made myself another solitary meal, Mrs. Thompson walked in. "You know, if you spent more time with us, maybe you'd feel more part of the family," she said, her tone accusatory. I looked at her, feeling the irony of her words. "I try, Mrs. Thompson, but it's hard when I feel like everything I do is wrong in your eyes," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She just huffed and walked out, leaving me alone again. I realized then that no matter how much I tried, I would always be an outsider in this house. My presence was tolerated, not welcomed. And with Mark away, the thin veneer of family harmony was quickly unraveling. The day started like any other, but it turned into the worst day of my life. I was in my room, headphones on, when Anna barged in without knocking. "Your phone's been ringing off the hook," she said, her voice unusually somber. I pulled off my headphones, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Who is it?" I asked, reaching for my phone. "It's Mark's company," she replied, avoiding my gaze. My hands trembled as I answered the call. The voice on the other end was calm, but the words were like a sledgehammer. "There's been an accident. Mark's plane. I'm so sorry." The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. My whole world collapsed in that moment. Mark, my husband, my best friend, gone. I don't remember much after that. I vaguely recall Mrs. Thompson and Anna in the living room, their voices a distant echo. "Did you hear about Mark?" Mrs. Thompson's voice was flat, almost emotionless. "Yeah, what a shame. But you know, with his job, it was always a risk," Anna replied, her tone too casual for the gravity of the situation. Their words felt like a betrayal. Where was the grief? The loss? It was as if Mark was just an inconvenience removed from their lives. In the days that followed, I was a ghost in the house, barely eating, barely existing. Mark's funeral was a blur. I remember standing there, feeling the weight of my loneliness, surrounded by people who were supposed to be family. But a new shock awaited me. Amidst my sorrow, I discovered I was pregnant. The news brought a confusing mix of joy and heartache. A part of Mark was still with me, yet he'd never know. After the funeral, Mrs. Thompson's true colors shone brighter than ever. "Rose, we need to talk about the house," she said, her voice cold and calculating. I looked at her, not comprehending. "What about the house?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "You can't stay here anymore. Now that Mark's gone, there's no reason for you to be here," she stated bluntly. I felt the room spin. "But this was my home with Mark," I protested weakly. "Was. Past tense. You need to find somewhere else to live," she said, her eyes void of any sympathy. Anna chimed in. "Yeah, Rose, it's time to move on. You don't really belong here anyway." "I need to tell you something," I began, my voice shaky. "I'm pregnant. Mark was going to be a father." Their reaction was nothing like I expected. Mrs. Thompson scoffed. "Pregnant? That's convenient. Trying to find a reason to stay here, are you?" Anna joined in. "Yeah, right. As if we'd believe that. You just don't want to leave." I stood there, stunned. Their words stung more than I could express. "It's true," I insisted, my voice barely above a whisper, but they just laughed it off. I packed my bags in a daze, each item a reminder of the life I had lost. As I was about to leave, I turned to them. "You're kicking me out at the worst time of my life. How can you be so cruel?" Mrs. Thompson looked at me, her expression unmoved. "Life's tough. You better learn that fast." With nowhere to go, I left the house, each step away feeling like a descent into an unknown abyss. The future was a dark void, and I was walking into it alone. A month had passed since Mark's funeral, and I was living with Aunt Sarah, his kind-hearted aunt who had taken me in. The grief was still raw, but life had to go on, especially now that I was pregnant. I was in the middle of a web design project when Aunt Sarah called me from the living room. "Rose, there's a call for you. Sounds important." Curious, I answered the phone. "Hello, this is Rose." "Mrs. Thompson, I'm John from Greenfield Notary. I'm calling about your late husband's last affairs," the voice on the other end said. My heart skipped a beat. "What about them?" I asked. "Your husband had a life insurance policy, and you're the sole beneficiary. It's a substantial amount," John explained. I felt a mix of shock and relief. "How much are we talking about?" I inquired, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's quite a large sum, Ms. Rose. Enough to secure a good future for you and your child," he replied. I hung up the phone, my mind racing. This money could change everything. I could start a new life, provide for my baby, maybe even move to a place of our own. I shared the news with Aunt Sarah. "That's wonderful, Rose. Mark always was thoughtful. He's taken care of you even now," she said, her eyes moist. The news of the insurance money spread quickly, and it wasn't long before Mrs. Thompson called. "Rose, I heard about the insurance. We need to talk," she said, her tone insistent. I braced myself. "What about it, Mrs. Thompson?" "You know, since you're the beneficiary, I think it's only fair that you share some of that money with us. After all, we're Mark's family too," she demanded. I couldn't believe her audacity. "Share the money? After you kicked me out when I needed you the most?" I replied, my voice firm. "Well, we have expenses too, and you're living off my son's money," she retorted. "That money is for me and my child, Mrs. Thompson." "I won't give you a dime," I said, the resolve in my voice surprising even me. "Think about it, Rose. Don't be selfish," she said before hanging up. But I had made up my mind. I was going to use that money to start a new life, far from the judgment and cruelty of Mrs. Thompson and Anna. I began looking for apartments, something cozy and welcoming, a place where I could raise my child in peace. The thought of having my own space, a sanctuary for me and my baby, filled me with hope. 6 months into my pregnancy, I was finally settling into my new apartment. It was a small, cozy place, filled with the promise of new beginnings. I had just finished setting up the baby's crib when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I was surprised to see Mrs. Thompson and Anna standing at my door when I opened it. "Rose, we need to talk," Mrs. Thompson said, pushing past me into the apartment. Anna followed her, eyeing the place with a mix of curiosity and disdain. "Nice little spot you got here," she remarked, her tone laced with envy. "What are you doing here?" I asked, trying to mask my discomfort. Mrs. Thompson took a deep breath. "We've been thinking about how things ended between us. We want to apologize." I was taken aback. "Apologize? After you threw me out?" Anna chimed in. "Look, Rose, we were upset. But we're family, right? We should stick together." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Family? You made it clear I was no longer part of your family." Mrs. Thompson glanced at my swollen belly and her tone softened. "We didn't know about the baby. We want to make things right." I scoffed. "Now that you see I'm actually pregnant, you suddenly care?" "It's not just that," Anna said quickly. "Things have been tough since you left. We thought maybe you could come back. Help out." I stared at them, incredulous. "You want me to come back after everything?" Mrs. Thompson took a step forward. "We need your help, Rose. Financially, we're struggling." I shook my head in disbelief. "So, this isn't about making amends. You just need money." Anna's face hardened. "Look, Rose, we all have to make sacrifices. You have the means to help the family. I felt a surge of anger. I am not your family. Not anymore. You made that clear when you kicked me out. Mrs. Thompson's expression faltered. Rose, please. Think of it as helping for the sake of your child's grandparents. I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. Grandparents? You never once acted like grandparents. You won't see a cent from me. And you certainly won't be a part of my child's life. The realization dawned on their faces. They had hoped for an easy solution to their problems, but I was no longer the same person they had once manipulated. Anna tried a different approach. Rose, be reasonable. It's not good to hold grudges, especially in your condition. My condition has nothing to do with this. You made your bed, now lie in it, I said firmly. Defeated, Mrs. Thompson turned towards the door. You'll regret this, Rose. Family is everything. As they left, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. They had come expecting to find the same vulnerable girl they had once known, but I had grown stronger, more resilient. I looked around my apartment, at the little crib that awaited my child, and I knew I had made the right decision. My future, and my child's future, was here, in this new life I had built for us. Living in my own space, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in a long time. My pregnancy was advancing well, and I was busy preparing for my new role as a mother. One evening, as I was browsing online for baby supplies, my phone rang. It was Aunt Sarah. Rose, have you heard the latest about the Thompsons? She asked, her voice tinged with a mix of concern and disbelief. No, what happened? I replied, pausing my browsing. They're selling the house. Apparently, they're in deep financial trouble, Aunt Sarah informed me. I was stunned. The house? But that's been in their family for years. Seems like they can't afford to keep it anymore. Anna's husband lost his job, and without your financial contribution, they've hit rock bottom, she explained. I felt a strange mix of vindication and pity. I can't believe they're selling the house. Where will they go? From what I heard, they're moving into a much smaller place. Anna is not taking it well. She's had to get a job at a local store, Aunt Sarah said. The news hit me unexpectedly. Anna, who had always looked down on anyone who worked a regular job, was now working in retail. Wow, that's a big change for her, I said, trying to process the information. Yeah, she's been complaining to anyone who'll listen. But, you know, maybe this will be a good lesson for her. A bit of hard work never hurt anyone, Aunt Sarah added. I thought about how much my life had changed since leaving the Thompson house. I guess we all get what we deserve eventually, I mused. We chatted a bit more before saying our goodbyes. I sat back and thought about the twist of fate. Mrs. Thompson and Anna, once so proud and unyielding, were now facing their own struggles. It was a harsh reality, but one that seemed fitting given how they had treated me. I had learned the hard way that kindness and compassion were invaluable, and their absence could lead to a fall from grace. As I resumed browsing for baby items, I felt a renewed sense of gratitude for the life I was building. My journey had been tough, but it led me to a place of independence and inner strength. The day I brought my son, Leo, home marked the start of a beautiful yet challenging journey. He was a bundle of joy, his tiny fingers wrapping around mine, bringing a sense of purpose and love I had never known. As I watched him sleep peacefully in his crib, I thought about returning to my work as a web designer. Aunt Sarah had been my rock through all the upheaval, always there to offer support and wisdom. You're going to balance this just fine, Rose, she reassured me one evening as we sat in the living room, Leo cradled in my arms. You're strong, and you've got a good head on your shoulders. I smiled, grateful for her encouragement. Thanks, Aunt Sarah. I just want to give Leo the best life possible. It was during one of these peaceful afternoons that my phone rang, shattering the calm. The caller ID showed Anna's number, a name I hadn't seen in months. With a deep breath, I answered, bracing myself. Rose, you need to give us money. You're living all posh while we're scraping by. Anna's voice was sharp, tinged with desperation. I was taken aback by her blunt demand. Anna, I'm not responsible for your financial situation. I have my own family to take care of now. You always think you're better than us, don't you? Just because you got that insurance money, she retorted, her voice rising. I've just given birth to a child, Anna. My focus is on my son now, I replied, trying to keep my composure. I don't care about your kid. We need that money, Rose, she yelled into the phone. I felt a surge of anger and disbelief. How could she be so heartless? Without another word, I hung up the phone and immediately blocked her number. The nerve of her, demanding money and disregarding the fact that I was a new mother, struggling with my own challenges. Aunt Sarah, who had overheard the conversation, put a comforting hand on my shoulder. Don't let her get to you, Rose. You're doing what's best for you and Leo. I nodded, still shaken by the call. I just can't believe she would stoop so low. It's unfortunate, but some people only think of themselves. You just focus on your baby and your work. You're doing great, Aunt Sarah encouraged. As I rocked Leo in my arms, I realized that this was my world now. My son, my work, and the new life I was building. No amount of guilt-tripping or demands from my past could take that away from me. I looked down at Leo, his innocent eyes slowly drifting closed, and whispered a promise to him. We're going to be just fine, little one. Just you and me, and all the love in the world. Life with my newborn son, Leo, was a beautiful, if sometimes exhausting, adventure. Balancing motherhood and my web design business from home was challenging, but I found joy in every little moment with him. Aunt Sarah, my late husband's aunt, would often come over to help, her presence a constant comfort in my new life as a single mom. One sunny afternoon, I decided to take Leo for a walk in his stroller. The fresh air was good for both of us, and I enjoyed these quiet moments, walking through the neighborhood. On a whim, I decided to stop by a small store to pick up some essentials. As I maneuvered the stroller through the aisles, I spotted a familiar face. It was Anna, my sister-in-law, working as a salesperson. Her mother, Mrs. Thompson, was with her, and they were deep in conversation. I couldn't help but notice the stark contrast from the last time I saw them. Their clothes were worn and plain, far from the well-kept appearance they used to maintain. They looked tired, almost defeated. I paused for a moment, wondering if I should approach them, but they saw me first. Their faces changed instantly, a mix of surprise, embarrassment, and a hint of disdain. Neither of them made a move to speak to me, and I decided it was best to leave it that way. I continued my shopping, keeping my distance. I could feel their eyes on me as I moved through the store, but I focused on Leo, who was babbling happily in his stroller. As I left the store, I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed. The last time I had seen Anna and Mrs. Thompson, they were in a completely different position, looking down on me from their perceived higher status. Now, the tables had turned. Not that I took any pleasure in their misfortune, but it was a stark reminder of how quickly life could change. Back home, as I fed Leo and played with him, I thought about the journey that had brought me here. It had been filled with ups and downs, but I had come out stronger, more resilient. I had a beautiful son, a career I was passionate about, and the support of Aunt Sarah. That evening, as I put Leo to bed, I whispered a promise to him. I'll always be here for you, my little one. We'll make our own way, no matter what life throws at us.